About 2 years ago, just before Three Houses came out, I put out a video analyzing the trailer, noting that Nemesis and Saros both seemed to have elements that made them seem like they might be potential villains in the game. I noted the brutality that had by and large been absent in other Fire Emblem games, and the fact that the general tone of the community believed that the church would play a role as the villains in the story. Now that the dust is settled, Three Houses and all its DLC have been out and played and overanalyzed, I want to make a video detailing my thoughts. Or, more accurately, I wanted to make a video to address the fact that I keep getting more and more views and comments on my original video, dwarfing the total views and comments of all my other videos combined outside of my solo run, so let's get this over with. Obvious spoiler warning for all roots of Three Houses here. To begin, let's address my first video, Nemesis and Saros. This cutscene is from hundreds of years ago during a war wherein Nemesis and his followers killed all the dragons and made weapons from their bones, the relic weapons. The sword of the creator was, quite literally, a sword made from the bones of the creator goddess Sothis. Yeah, I meant it when I said spoilers. Saros, being one of the last direct children of Sothis, killed Nemesis and took the sword back. The war on her end was righteous vengeance, not necessarily any evil or malintent there. Nemesis himself? We can argue whether the dragons were oppressive or not, but the truth is, we don't actually know any of that. We get hardly any information about this war because it was so far in the past and our only source of information is Rhea, aka Saros herself, so there's naturally going to be some bias in that account. Yes, biased accounts, that's what we're dealing with in Three Houses. Once we get into the game proper, there are a handful of characters that can be seen as villains, those who slither in the dark, Rhea, Edelgard, and to a certain extent Dimitri and Claude. Let's take a quick look at all of them. Let's get Claude out of the way first. He wants to be a third party. In most routes he barely even joins the war, and he seems more than happy to leave when things aren't going his way. A minor antagonist for Edelgard, sure, but not the true villain, no matter what his scheming nature might say. Dimitri is a bit harder to pin down, what with all the rage and brooding darkness he has going on, particularly post-time skip. In Silver Snow and Verdant Wind, he makes an appearance in Gronder as something of a force of chaos, wanting only to kill Edelgard, and you if you get in his way, before dying ignobly off-screen. In Crimson Flower, he appears a lot more like a noble enemy general, opposing you on an ideological front by not wanting to surrender his kingdom, but not underhanded or evil, just an antagonist for Edelgard, who ends up being willing to go to some extreme lengths to win. I wouldn't call that a villain either. Edelgard herself? Well, that's a tough one, and I'm going to refer you to Gast's video for all the details on that, but I'll quickly summarize my own thoughts here. The only route wherein she is not a perceived primary antagonist for at least the majority of the post-time skip is where you side with her in Crimson Flower. Following an effective coup to name herself Emperor of Adrestria, Edelgard begins a surprise war against the Church of Saros and all who follow it. Before the time skip, she masquerades as the Flame Emperor to work alongside those who slither in the dark to steal crest stones, as well as standing by to let them experiment in towns, turn innocent students into crest beasts, and eventually murder Geralt. Even if she wasn't a mastermind of these plans, or claims she didn't approve, she still didn't do anything to dissuade them, as far as we can tell at least, so she is effectively complicit with these actions. Not a great start for her. And sure, maybe the church might have had it coming for all the actions they've taken as Fodhen's primary governing body, interfering with the Empire to break up disputes and the like, but that's all politics, and depending on whose side you're on, a lot of those actions could be seen as good things, especially if the Empire was getting too large or dangerous or oppressive in its own right. We don't have solid answers to these questions, and again, the only direct sources we get are from Rhea and Edelgard, two people who have massive biases on these events. The biggest point against Edelgard, though, is how she continues to work with those who slither in the dark, who are almost comically evil by the standards of the rest of Fodhen's potential suite of antagonists, but I'll get to that later. Even in her own route, she acknowledges they're evil, sure, but she just says we'll deal with them later, and then it supposedly happens off-screen after the game ends. So, Edelgard is a warmonger with some lofty ideals who works with outright villains to get what she wants and doesn't seem to care about what happens to the people outside of her personal cabinet. She might claim not to want to work with those who slither in the dark, but the point remains that she never actually takes any direct action against them on screen. She profits from their research. When the Javelins of Light drop, she just uses them as another propaganda tool against the church, despite clearly knowing that the church itself had nothing to do with it. Either she's knowingly complicit in those who slither in the dark's actions and just outwardly says she doesn't condone them, or she is potentially being a pawn in their schemes despite thinking it's the other way around. Either way, not very heroic if you ask me, no matter how tragic her backstory is. Next up on the analysis of villainy is Rhea. Poor Rhea. You were pegged as evil even before the game released, because most JRPG religious leaders end up being villains in the end. And you, well, I don't know if you qualify as an exception. Rhea is a woman gone mad, both with the driven insanity to restore Sothis in the flesh, as well as just plain Fire Emblem dragon madness, the type afflicting the likes of Duma, Mila, Indek, Mikuel, and probably most if not all true dragons in the entire franchise. The most generous take is that Rhea is an overprotective mother/daughter figure to Byleth/Sothis. It's weird, but not quite as confusing as the Corrin situation in Fates. Though in truth, she's been on the path of dragon madness long before the events of Three Houses. We get her feeling completely betrayed, with her single purpose becoming reclaiming the heart of Sothis at the end of Crimson Flower, but the true unraveling happens at the end of Silver Snow, where it's revealed that not only has she been trying to resurrect Sothis through several individuals, but she bestows her blood upon many of the Knights of Seiros as well, effectively linking them to her draconic nature almost like some sort of hive mind. It's unclear how or why this works, but she effectively has a dragon sleeper army, ready to come out and fight, or go berserk and kill haphazardly at a moment's notice. The Church of Seiros is an authoritarian powerhouse that spreads all across Fodlan, and Rhea is the one giving the final say. We see this with Lunato's rebellion, how supposedly no one from the rebelling faction was left alive, as well as with Edelgard's summarized history that the Church divided the Empire to create the Kingdom of Fargus and later the Leicester Alliance. But as a massive authoritarian governance body that technically is a nation unto itself, but has the power to divide up other nations, automatically evil. I mean, not inherently, but from the simplified view of storytelling, it definitely looks oppressive, if you're from the Empire at least, although the Kingdom and the Alliance probably have some well-justified reasons to support the Church as an entity, so it's one of those depends on who you ask sorts of things. But this is about Rhea, not about the Church, and her seat of power is only one aspect of her. I would say that dragon madness and obsession over restoring Sothis can easily paint her as a villain, though I honestly feel like she gets her bad reputation. She isn't a good person, that's for sure, but I'm hard-pressed to call her outright evil. At least, that's what I would have said until I had a look at the Shadow Library. Rhea isn't just the leader of the Church, or a power-hungry mad dragon. She's been actively interfering with the lives of individuals, trying to force humanity to be reliant upon her and the Church of Seiros, and stifling advancements in technology in an effort to maintain absolute control. And even beyond the Shadow Library, we have revisionist history, taking what could not be removed from humanity, the crests, and reframing them as gifts from the goddess instead of their real purpose as tools to slay the goddess and her people, thus both putting the crest bearers in a position of authority under her direction, as well as initiating what would become rampant class warfare between those who have crests and those who do not. Now, to be fair, Rhea didn't force other people to tear each other apart based on the privilege of crests, but it seems like almost human nature for those in positions of privilege and authority to use and abuse it over those who are disadvantaged. Individuals may exist who do not, but the general trend of humankind is to seek power and control as a means of stability. Rhea could have done more to intervene, yet she didn't, so we at the very least need to throw her under the same bus as we put Edelgard under. Except, instead of a possible want to fight against the monster she helped create, she doesn't even seem to care at all. Before the DLC, I understood the hate for Rhea, but I didn't think she was downright evil. And even after, calling her evil is more of a question about what evil even means. But the point stands that she, victim of Nemesis or not, set into motion 1,000 years of stalled progress in human struggle, meaning she is far from the benevolent figure she paints herself as. Who I don't have a hard time calling outright evil though is those who slither in the dark. Solon, Kronia, Cornelia, Thales, and the big man Nemesis himself. These are all about as comic book villainous as you can get in Fodlan. They scheme about overthrowing world governments, they descended from a tribe of people who murdered all the dragons and started the first major war of the continent, they live underground and develop super weapons such as dragonbone weapons, giant mechs, magic rituals to transform people into demonic beasts, and essentially nuclear weapons. They experiment on individuals and have no regard for human life, and they're willing to work with anyone only to backstab them later. There is no question that those who slither in the dark are the real villains of the story. The only sad thing is that you only actually fight them in 2 of the 4 story paths. In Azure Moon, you never even hear about them again after the time skip, only dealing with the robots under Cornelia. And in Crimson Flower, you effectively profit off of their schemes up until the credits roll and a narrator voice says that another war with them happens off screen. All in all, Fire Emblem Three Houses is definitely the most diverse Fire Emblem game when it comes to questions about who is right and who is wrong. The Split War story is hard to pull off, and while there are definitely some flaws and gaps in it, overall I feel it works in the game's favor to create characters with surprising depth. Although having to replay the game several times to get that depth is a hard ask for a lot of people. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this dive back into Three Houses. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you appreciated the video. I personally can't wait for the next Fire Emblem game, and though I hope that they have some deeper characters, I wouldn't necessarily be upset if they didn't have this many questions about the real villain of the story, because my goodness, if I have to read one more Edelgard Do Nothing Wrong post, I'm going to lose my mind.